Welcome to the E-Show with Neil Ravin. Founded in 2013, the EHL has become the college placement leader on the East Coast. Sit back and learn more about the next step in your junior hockey career.
Welcome to the E-Show, presented by the Penalty Box Foundation. The Foundation's mission centers around their daily motto, we take care of our own, as they help out all of those within the hockey community who've experienced a catastrophic event. Learn more at penaltyboxfoundation.org. What's up? My name is Neil Ravin, and this is episode number 164 of the E-Show. On this week's episode, we head to the Central Division and feature a club that has been right on the verge of reaching the EHL Frozen Finals for the past 2 seasons. Jake Basile chats with Greg Heffernan as he gears up for his third campaign with the Connecticut Chiefs. Heffernan brought with him to the Chiefs a resume that includes a 12-year stint as the head coach at Western New England University and 5 additional seasons serving as an assistant coach at both SUNY Fredonia and Mercyhurst College. The veteran coach gives a lot of credit to the relationships that he made at the collegiate level as a big reason why he's been able to push 16 players and counting into the NCAA ranks from the Chiefs.
Hello, E-Show. For today's Coach's Corner chat, I am joined by Chiefs head coach and general manager Greg Heffernan. Coach Heffernan has been with the Chiefs for the past 2 seasons, joining the organization after 12 years with Western New England University. There, he was the head coach, but his time in college hockey extends prior to that with years spent in SUNY Fredonia and Mercyhurst College. Coach Heffernan grew up in Canada, where his playing career took him to Division I university hockey in Canada with Concordia. Coach, we thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jake.
So just reflecting on the last 2 seasons in the EHL, Chiefs have had some of the best seasons in their history and closer than ever to Providence, both years 1 or 2 goals away. So what is your balance of pride and frustration there?
Frustration, real simple, is we gave up 1 goal in the last 2 games of the playoff series that sends us to Providence, and we still don't go because the Worcester Railers did an even better job of playing team defense, and hats off to them. But somebody had told me that you'd give up 1 goal in 120 minutes in game 2 and 3 and not go. I would have said I've got a better chance of waking up with my head sewn to the carpet. So, no, hats off to them. But that's the frustration, of course, because you want to win. But on the flip side, you asked about the pride things. By the end of this year, right now we're at 8 commits this year. We're going to get to 10 easily because there's 2 players that have multiple offers and are just making their final decisions on school. And so it'll be 20 players in the last 2 years that we've helped move on to college hockey and at the NCAA level, and another dozen to the ACHA. So, we're checking off the boxes in the areas that are really the most important areas for me, which is development, exposure, and placement. So that's really the pride moments for me. And love to get to Providence and get through Worcester next season. But I certainly would imagine it's again going to be a daunting task because I know that Sean does a tremendous job with that program, and he and I have developed a really healthy, fun, competitive relationship, and we'll have our turn at some point. So
yeah, well, those games are certainly some of the most fun of the year. And you mentioned the recruitments, and we're gonna the college recruitments. We're gonna get to that a little bit later because obviously that's the goal of this league. But just a little bit more on the season, up and down year for you guys. Started off really hot with some great wins. What are just some of your overall takeaways from your team this year?
I think it was a great learning year, not only for them, but also for me. You mentioned my background, and I've been doing this quite some time, and I still find ways to learn. And I think, we had a great start, but I also think there were some areas there that we had a few holes in our game that we could have done a little bit better job of addressing in terms of wins and losses. But sometimes you go through seasons where you play really solid hockey and you just have a tough time scoring goals, and that was really the MO of this year. And I think probably led the league in hit posts, but if there's a stat that could ever be measured on that, I feel like we certainly could have owned that. But that's the nature of it, and that's kind of how our season was, up and down. And I think what it's done for me and for the guys that are returning is really provide a basis of comparison. So when we go to the future and we're playing next season, we might be able to flatten some of those highs and lows instead of it being 1s and 9s, maybe keep it at 5s to 7s, right?
So you did mention your background a little bit. You've been doing this for a long time. So you started out, one of your second positions was serving as a recruiting coordinator for Fredonia. So knowing what colleges are looking for, how does that help you in preparing your junior players for the college game?
Yeah, so I'm blessed to work with a guy who's been at Fredonia since the late 80s, and Jeff Meredith, and he's a good friend and a guy that I've learned an awful lot from. I think really what it really boils down to is making sure that a player is a complete player. I tell this to our guys all the time. You might be a first, second line guy here, a top defenseman here, but every college that you are committing to, you're going to start as a fifth line guy or as an out of the lineup defenseman. You got to work your way in. You're the new guy on the street. And I think developing a holistic player, a guy that's able to do things within his game that aren't just the flashy stuff that he could get away with as a 20-year-old in junior hockey, because that 21-year-old is a freshman playing against 24 and 5-year-olds that have already established themselves. So one of the things that we look at and try to preach on a daily basis is habits. And the people that have seen us play is one of the things I'm very proud of is we can play with good tempo, but I think our guys are very responsible by and large as far as we don't give up a ton of goals. And I think a lot of that is really kind of embedding into our players about process and about making sure you're good in every area of the game, not just waiting up at center ice, waiting to go score a goal. So, yeah.
So would you say that, when you were recruiting for the college level and now recruiting at the junior level, how similar is it? Are you looking for the same things or is it a different process?
I think the process is always the same. I think it's just a matter of what your needs are in any given year. So you're going to have a year where, let's give a college example. We recruited a couple of pretty good players. We had a couple All-Americans at Fredonia that I recruited. And they were replacing guys that were really offensive threats at both defense and forward at Fredonia. And I got to recruit a guy named Steve Reiser, who was an All-American, a guy named Jordan Oy that was an All-American. But they were replacing guys like Steve Albert and Colin Sarpe that were two guys that won a SUNY championship, and they had 30 points as defensemen in 25 games. And guys like Neil Sheehan and Kyle Pazoy and guys like that who had 45 points in 30 games. And so you're able to recruit those type of guys, but there's other years where the guys that are the most important guys on the team are the guys that are defending the 2-1 lead, the bigger, heavier defensemen that block shots and make sure the puck doesn't go in. Those guys are equally as valuable. So they might not get the accolades that some of the other guys get, but there's always a need for those guys as well. And in some circumstances, a bigger need for those guys because of the way they play an honest game, a 200-foot game. And so I think we really assess what are we losing, what do we need, where do we need to be better, where do we feel like we're already needs are. So I think that it's very similar in junior as it is in college, with the exception that in junior you can always acquire guys mid-season where you can't go and get a guy in November in college, right? So, so the recruiting process, I would say, is very similar in terms of what we're looking for, but the ability to go and acquire it might actually even be a little bit easier in junior, being that you're not confined by semesters.
And to you, as a whole, your coaching career began with Mercyhurst as a graduate assistant coach shortly after you stopped playing. So was it always your plan to stay in hockey?
Everything always led me back to hockey. I graduated with a degree in economics and actually had a job at a bank up in Montreal. And I had a really nice opportunity to grow in that field. But full transparency, I'm more of I'll work 12-hour days doing something that I love, but a 7.5-hour day at something that you don't. I found that was going to be a hard way to earn a living. And so when the opportunity came up at Mercyhurst, I jumped on it. And the fact that I could get a graduate degree when I did that was an easy sacrifice of full-time income for grad assistant slave labor. But doing something I'm passionate about. And then from that, I just fell in love with what I was doing and never looked back. So.
Did you specifically want to come to America to coach, or was it just a matter of where the opportunity popped up?
I think it's a matter of where the opportunity popped up, where I had some relationships with some people through doing camps and clinics and things like that. And, when the opportunity popped up and get a graduate degree and a student visa. And then what ends up happening is that once you've gone through that process, you can get an OPT, which is a different type of visa, which allows you a 1-year work visa. And that turns into a place sponsoring your employment, which turns into you getting citizenship and building your life and starting a family. And it just kind of materialized that way. It's not that I ever didn't want to go back to Canada or only wanted to be in the United States. It just kind of, that's what my path kind of was. So.
Yeah. Were there any differences? I'm sure there were. So what were the differences that you noticed in the American style of hockey when you first got here?
Yeah, it's still the same, right? Where it's a little bit more controlled in Canada. Like if you were to go and watch, take the best level of college hockey that you can. Okay, so you just had Quinnipiac just win a national championship in home state Connecticut, right? And shout out for Connecticut, UConn basketball, and Quinnipiac, two winter sport champions. But Quinnipiac, they're very, they're hard. They play hard. They are good. They're fast. They're up tempo. They defend well. They create. I can't say enough. Like they are fun to watch. And then on the flip side, another really fun game to watch is Canadian Major Junior, which is really, you would consider that kind of the equivalent of, that's where NHL prospects come from, those two levels, right? Well, a good friend of mine, the former head coach of the Erie Otters, BJ Adams, he was actually down here for our Worcester series, coming to visit with me. He coached Erie, and so I would go up there and I'd get his game film and things like that, and I'd go and visit with him. And you're watching 7 or 8 NHL players on the ice the year before. I was there for watching Dylan Strome and DeBrincat and Warren Fogle was on that team. Anthony Cirelli was on that team. It was
I think Adam Pelech too, right? New York Islanders.
Oh yeah. So that team was stacked, right? But you watch them and they play slower and controlled, and they move the puck, and it's style equally as effective. Both have their strengths, right? But two just different approaches to the game. And I go to a lot of American Hockey League games, and that's a little bit more Canadian style of play, only because I live in Springfield and I work in Hartford. So that's what I have. I don't have the Bruins. But you watch these guys play, and they're very controlled. They make good tape-to-tape passes. They have deliberate and methodical approach to everything that they do. And then I look at the way that the college game is, and it's a lot of it too, Jake, the factor of in college you play 25 games, in major, junior, and in pro you're playing 75 games, 80 games.
Yeah.
So you've got to be a little bit more deliberate and a little more methodical. You can't go 100 miles an hour every single game, or you'll be dead by February, right? So I think a lot of it is just approach to what the season is, and approach to what the human body can handle and not handle. So it's interesting. It's a great question. I'm sure there's a lot of other people that would debate my answer, but my takeaways is it's a little more run and gun in the U.S. and a little bit more controlled in Canada, but nonetheless, two great ways to play the game.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So speaking of changes, though, you went from the college level to AAA with the Cleveland Barons, their 18s team, and you won 2 state titles. So, you were pretty young then as far as coaching goes. So how much of a change of pace was that for you?
It was it was awesome. The players, they made me look good as a coach. It's easy to win championships when you got 11 Division I players on your roster. One of whom played in the NHL. Like it's those kids there at that time frame. I walked into an opportunity there to be able to recruit a very, very high-end group of players that were able to do some very special things individually. And the leagues were a little bit smaller back then, and recruiting wasn't internet-based the way it is now. You actually, were more regionalized because it was a lot of pound the pavement. That was an era where pagers were still beating out cell phones for popularity. So, it was, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's in that realm. There was no video on your phone. It was analog, and you had to hit three times to get an F. So, I'm dating myself a little bit here with the text messages. So, it was a lot of fun, but it was also a really good opportunity to really shape some really young kids and see how their paths develop over the course of the next decade. So that was, very good experience.
And so after that, it was right back to the college game for you. 3 years at Fredonia, where you got a SUNY title. So was there something specifically about the college level that you really liked?
You know what? Yes. It was always like my experience was. Don't kid yourself. I interviewed for a number of junior jobs when I was coaching midget, but at that point in my life, I thought that at the college game, having been at Mercyhurst before, I thought that that's where I could go as a single young guy and make an impact as a recruiter. And I thought that and learning how to do it as somebody who's making some significant decisions with regards to recruiting was going to be a much better thing for my experience and my development as a young coach, rather than continuing on in a junior path, staying at midget AAA path. I just at that point there, being young and single, it was really easy to spend a lot of time on the road. So I thought that was going to be the best path, and it turns out that it was. So.
And a relatively quick transition to a head coaching gig. So how did you end up at Western New England, where you took over the reins?
Twofold. Jeff Meredith is a genius at developing assistant coaches. If I had been a little bit smarter, I probably would have learned everything I needed to in 2 years instead of 3. But he was an absolute genius at allowing guys enough room to grow, and yet putting them in a situation where the structure of his environment and how he teaches you how to be a head coach without he Miyagi's you. Another 80s reference there. He teaches you how to be a head coach without you realizing you're learning how to be a head coach. And he's got a tremendous way about him. If you look at his coaching tree, it is full of head coaches and guys that move on to athletic director positions or general managers or guys that move to I think his last guy is now with the U.S. National Program, and he's got guys that are USHL and head coaches in the North America. Like, he's got guys everywhere. College hockey head coaches. He just does a tremendous job of, you don't even realize what you're learning while you're there. You're just learning it on an everyday basis, and all of a sudden you know how to make the decisions that separate head coaches and assistant coaches. And I got an opportunity at Western New England twofold, in that their coach that was leaving was Chris Bernard, who went to Potsdam. Chris and I had a long-time relationship from doing camps up in Lake Placid together with Can-Am, and he actually picked up the phone and said, "Hey, I'm leaving. Are you interested in coming here?" And then the fact that Jeff makes a phone call on my behalf, and his track record of producing successful head coaches, went a long way with our athletic director, Mike Poulin, that hired me. And that's how it all kind of came to be.
And you were working with a team that hadn't been to a postseason berth in 9 years. So how difficult was it to kind of pick up with a team in a bit of a tougher state?
Actually, to be honest with you, it was actually easier than people would think, because you're walking into a situation where you can put your own stamp on. And Chris had done some nice things in terms of developing some culture there, and didn't stay long enough to reap the rewards, right? And so I was able to go in there and really just kind of do a little bit of recruiting early on, and take what he had kind of done and put my own spin on it. And like, it was already on the way to becoming successful. He had left, and I'm sure he would have got it there, but it was an opportunity for me to kind of put a little bit of my spin on it, and we got some good players in, and those players did a great job in taking the program, the next level. Ironically, I just went to one of their weddings on Friday night. Nick DiOrio, who actually works at our organization now, is an accountant, but he does some youth hockey stuff, and I got to see him and five other players from that era that graduated between 14 and 16, and it was awesome. Tough part with that at Western New England is when you go into a situation like that, you go and you bring in a big freshman class. You know that you're now setting yourself up career-wise for secular recruiting. For those that don't know what I mean, it just means that you're going to have 2 years in a row where you're really good, and 2 years in a row where you're going to struggle, or maybe 3 years where you're going to struggle, and then you're going to have another couple years where you're going to be good. And it's because your classes can never get caught up to be balanced out. And so the years where you're heavy with juniors and seniors, you're going to be good, and the years where you're heavy with freshmen and sophomore, you're going to be developing. So, so that's the story there.
So in those 12 years, some pretty big moments, 4 straight postseason berths. They have the highest win percentage with you there in the last over 20 years, winning the Rutland Herald Invitational. So how much pride do you take in your accomplishments there?
You know what? You're twice as good as you ever were when you're removed, and when you're there, you're only half as good as you actually are. So it's one of those ones where I've had some chance to sit back and reflect, and very proud of some of the things that we accomplished. And, at the end of the day, I would have loved to have won a championship there. We fell short a couple of times, but I'm most proud of just circling back to going to that wedding that I was at on Friday night was one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life, to see a group of guys, one who's an accountant, another one is a DEA agent, another one is an investment banker doing analytic data research, another one is a partner at Mutual Life in Long Island with 600 people underneath them. I've got one coaching hockey full-time for a living that was there, and another one that's a correctional officer. And I'm sitting there going, how successful these guys have become. And to have them come back and they're, hugging me and I'm hugging them, and the relationships that I was able to build, like, to be completely honest with you, I don't even care about the hockey side of it. It's those guys there that I was fortunate enough to have some type of small impact on their life successes, and having them come up and jump between me and my wife and try to tell stories about things that happened. Not one single hockey story. They were always talking about stories where they were either getting in trouble or accomplishing something, or rules that I put in place that I probably would never put in place at where I'm at now in my life, and how society's changed and things. But that's the most gratifying thing. I mean, it honestly has absolutely nothing to do with the hockey. It's the guys that you get to work with, and and seeing how successful they become. And I trade every win that we had there for every guy to have the success that these guys are having.
And so a lot of that success obviously comes from education, and you put so much emphasis on that in your time there. Your team's always had a lot of the all academic players in the CCC, and so in the juniors game and still back then, how are you still instilling that in the players today when they're out of school? And is that like one of the biggest lessons that you took away from your time in college hockey?
Absolutely. And so it's funny. Before we got on the call, I just had a recruit down at the rink, and I just explained to him and his dad that, hey, we do hockey here from first thing in the morning till lunchtime, right? It's that big 4.5, 5 hour window, and we're doing hockey, video workouts, all of that type of stuff there. But I fully expect and demand that you're not playing Xbox the rest of the day. So you're either going to go get a job, stock some shelves at Costco. I mean, you can work second shift there and make a fortune for some of these kids, or Home Depot or what have you. Or you're going to take some classes. Now, taking classes isn't necessarily a benefit to every kid. So maybe it's getting a job, or maybe it's because of the COVID years, the SATs didn't really exist for a period of time. Maybe it's as simple as studying for your SATs. And even though a lot of schools are test optional, maybe it's go and take them. It's at the very least, it's going to, at bare minimum, you're going to have to do some studying, and that's going to be good for you. So, the education side of things is something that, at least under my regime here at the Connecticut Chiefs, is going to be something that's not only important, but it's going to be mandated. And I think the college coaches will, in fact, I know they do respect the fact that we are trying to create a holistic approach towards what we're doing. And I think that might help a few guys when it comes down to whether or not a college coach wants to offer them a spot. The fact that they've been continuing in an environment where there's been some structure and there's been some things that they're accountable to that are not just getting to practice on time and working out. And so, it's certainly something that I think is a very important and integral part of the junior hockey process.
So while staying on that topic, so many commitments this year, like you said, and a good variety of them, but a couple guys headed to WNE. So what did you tell Spencer Clark and Sam Logan about the school?
Well, so I'm a lifelong learner. I actually did a second graduate degree from there. I did my MBA there. I believe in their education, and I believe in Coach Young. When I left Western New England to take the job with Connecticut, one of the guys that I recommended to the committee was Mike Young. I think he does a great job. I think he's a guy that understands the opportunities that a school with a solid academic reputation like Western New England has. And I think also, like Spencer Clark. So a great example right there. Spencer Clark played for the Railers, went down to Florida for a season. He was there, I think, before COVID, then Florida during COVID, then back up to us. Spencer Clark's mom works at the school. Spencer Clark's been on that campus plenty of times. His mom and his family, among the nicest people that I know. Spencer Clark broke his ankle early season this year, and played the better part of the remainder of the season when he came back on one leg, because he came back a little bit too early and just wanted to play. But Mike Young had enough faith in him and what he had seen in his practice habits that he checked off a lot of boxes that they have values for. And Spencer Clark is a guy that obviously knows about the school because his mom works there, sees the value in that. And so he commits early, and Mike committed him with a broken ankle, which tells you how much he loves him as a kid and as a person. And then a guy like Sam Logan, who near the end of the season was wavering on whether or not he wanted to come back. And he asked me, he said, "What do you think of Western New England?" I said, "It's a home run, man. Like, you create a life for yourself. You spent 4 years investing in your degree there. You create a life for yourself that, you'll be able to be employable on day one, and you'll be able to take your 4-year investment and turn it into a 40-year life. So if you want me to, I'd love to have you back. It hurts us to not be able to have you back, but you know what? My job isn't to get you back. My job's to get you on. So, you know, I endorsed him to Mike. Mike already knew he was a tremendous player. And for him, he's a guy that values education, and his family values education. And that place there is a place that, you know, it moves the needle when it comes to being a really good college. And there's a lot else, you know, I can't hold my personal, you know, biases in there, you know, having been there, because there's a lot of really good schools out there that are very comparable. But I know that those two guys are in for a quality education and a quality experience there.
So getting guys to so many different schools as well. I mean, Limmer to Wentworth, Rossi to St. A's, and among many others. How have your connections from your coaching years been a factor?
It's like anything else, right? Trust and friendship, right? So just by virtue of where I was working, I've developed great relationships with guys, and you're on the road with those guys, you're battling and competing with those guys. So, you know, I think that it's a unique advantage that I have, and I want to use it to help our players and even any other players in the league. There's been a number of times where guys have asked me about players in the league, and if there's anything I can do to help another player in the league that's worthy of being helped, then we do that. And I think, you know, I think the fact that there's a relationship there and the fact that I've been there kind of validates my opinion, maybe in a way that, you know, isn't necessarily the case everywhere. But most of the guys in our league do a great job with that type of thing as well. So
at both levels, the Chiefs are a team that have a strong amount of returners every year, tons of guys moving up. So how much emphasis do you place on retention? And, you know, for the team, what does that do to see the same guys back? And for you as a guy involved in recruiting?
Yeah, so I think retention is a product of the environment that we have here, where guys are in a situation where they want to be here. And by and large, I would say the vast majority of players are having a great experience while they're here, which is why our retention is fairly strong. For me, from a recruiting standpoint and from a placement standpoint, having a guy play 2 years, number one, he's a guy that has a body of work. And number two, he's a guy that I've got just a little bit longer of a relationship with, so that when we're talking about where he fits in a college lineup or what his capabilities are at the junior level, we just have a little bit better depth of knowledge and are able to you know, maybe help that player in a way that's a little different than the guy you're trying to get to know in September and October. So that's definitely one of those things. And as far as the recruiting piece goes with that, I think that players all talk to players, and I think players will know that you know, at the end of the day, guys that are happy in the environment, like good for instance is we're set to return a couple of guys. I'll just use the two M's, Martin and Merkel, who are both guys that are energy guys. I love these guys. These guys are going to be really good college players for the right program, just in terms of what they bring on their everydays, right? And it's not necessarily a scoring thing or a production thing. They produce in areas of the game that are the intangible areas. And so those two guys are all set to come back. But in your exit interview with those guys, it's when you say, so, hey, so what are your plans next year? They kind of look at me like I've got two heads. Like, what do you mean? What are my plans? Like, I'm coming back. Like, like, and I'm sitting there going, okay, just making sure. And they're like looking at me like, well, if you'll have me, like, I mean, what did I do? I do something wrong? And I'm like, no, I love you guys. You guys are great. Like, so I think that's really, you know, when we get in an environment where guys are really, you know, bought into the development and bought into the everyday process, and some days are harder than others, like anything in life. But, you know, overall, when you get a chance to step back and take a breath, I think guys that are in an environment where they are thriving and where they trust, you know, they trust their coach and they trust their organization, I think you're in a good situation for success.
I'm really glad you brought up Marty. He became one of my favorite players to watch as the year went on. So from a midget player with the Chiefs to a 2-year premier player, even getting some P time this year, to a guy who ended up putting up all of his points in the second half of the season and then playing on what you called the identity line in the playoffs. How does that happen?
Because he's Marty. Marty's a college player all day long. It's funny, he got in a, and I know that the league and hockey in general is getting away from fighting, but he got in a little scrap up at the showcase in January, and immediately 2 different college guys are going, "Hey, tell me about Jared Martin." And so in some cases there might be a place for a little scrap here and there, but Marty, that's him, like, to a T. What we've done a really nice job of with him is helping him really kind of develop and understand how he can have his high level of compete and rein in some of the overzealous penalties that can occur when you have a player of that nature. I think he's going to be a really valuable guy to any NCAA lineup, just in what he brings. He's a PK guy. He's a team guy. He's a fun guy. Like, if you've ever seen him with his shirt off, he doesn't have a 6-pack. He's got an 8-pack. He's shredded. Like, he looks like the cover of a model's magazine. And I'll walk by him and I go, "Marty, how come you haven't hit the gym?" And he'll be like, "Come on, coach." And so it's one of those things where, he's just a fantastic young man and a guy that, has got like, as much as I love when he produces, he doesn't really need to be a score sheet guy to be a guy that impacts the game. And, I'm excited about him for next year.
So from a pair of guys who are coming back to your returners who have departed to college hockey now, just to name a few: Hunter Rossi, Luke Jordan, Gavin Globitz, Roscoe Eade, obviously part of the leadership core there too. We talked about how recruiting is different every year in terms of what you look for. So how difficult do you think it's going to be to bring in guys, maybe internally or externally, that, have done what they did?
Yeah. So those guys there are great leaders. There's no replacing. You don't just replace leadership, right? You have guys that you hope have grown within your program to be able to take what you talked earlier in this interview about the highs and the lows, right? So I look at some of the returning guys that we have coming back and having those guys just kind of bring the highs down a little bit and bring the lows up a little bit. And I think that in itself, with the fact that they've had a really good example to follow in some of our leadership, that I think from within our locker room, we're going to have a group of guys that are able to carry the ball, but they'll do it in their own way, right? It's impossible to replace the leadership group that we have, but you hope that with the leadership group that we will have next year, in their own way, will be able to put their own shape on it, right? It's going to be a completely different team, even though it's going to have a group of guys that are returning. And so we believe that the experiences that we had with our guys are going to be able to help shape their leadership, and we want them to lead with their own personalities. So I'm hoping that we have this same conversation next year, and you're asking me how I'm going to replace those guys. And the answer will again be, we're not. It's impossible to replace those guys, but we hope that we'll have a group that follow them, that see their example and emerge in their own way.
Perfect. Don't think I could think of a better way to wrap things up than that, Coach. Thank you so much for your time. This has been so insightful, and you got a great group of guys on your squad every year.
I really appreciate that. And we see you a ton of times because we play Worcester. I don't know, I counted it out. I've been in Worcester's building last year 17 times between the two teams, between exhibition games, CEGEP games, playoff games, regular season games. I'm going to start. I told Sean Bertoni I want my own locker room there. So, but yeah. So you know what? Thanks again. I really enjoy doing this with you, Jake. And anytime you need anything, please feel free to reach back out. Okay.
Thanks again, Coach. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to The E Show. Learn more at easternhockeyleague.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Also, be sure to subscribe and get notified when next week's podcast is released.